Advertising fraud is easy, legal, and extremely profitable. A fraudster can set up a website, scrape content from the internet, and run programmatic advertisements against that website. The fraudster can then purchase bot traffic. These bots will visit the page, consume advertisements, and return profit to the owner of that page. In a past life, Shailin Dhar worked for a company that set up these types of advertising fraud schemes. He was fascinated by the industry in the same way that plenty of people, including myself, get fascinated with the fast-moving market dynamics that are enabled by modern software, whether these people work in ad tech or in the financial sector. But over time, the novelty wore off, and Shailin realized how big the fraud problem is and how much it is hurting people. Shailin works at the DAR Method, a company that he founded to do advertising technology consulting and analysis and research. And in today's episode, Shailin and I discuss how bots and the poorly aligned incentives lead to systemic failures and financial loss for the brands who are purchasing online advertising. This is one of my favorite shows that I've done because Shailin speaks on something that many people don't speak on, which is the depth of advertising fraud. I really hope you enjoy this episode, and if you work for a company where you can do something to change the situation in advertising fraud, you should look at doing that. So you've got a bacon delivery service, and you need to notify your customers when their bacon has arrived at their doorstep. Twilio helps you make sure your customers get the bacon while it's hot. Twilio's programmable API lets you build SMS or voice alerts easily in the programming language of your choice, all in under 5 minutes with only a few lines of code. Now your customers get a text or a call the instant their bacon is ready. If your customers want to see the bacon frying on a hot pan, Twilio has video APIs and SDKs for the platforms that you know and love. Learn more at go.twilio.com/podcast and get an additional $10 when you sign up and upgrade your account. That's go.twilio.com/podcast. You will only pay for what you use, and it costs less than a penny to send a text. Get started at go.twilio.com/podcast. Get your bacon delivery service cooking with Twilio's APIs for voice, SMS, and video. Shailin Dhar is an ad fraud specialist who founded the DAR Method. Shailin, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thanks for having me.
I've been doing these shows about advertising fraud, and I've really been looking forward to talking to you because you have spent some time in the industry as I guess you would call it a black hat. You were involved in some advertising fraud schemes, although, you could argue that anybody who's in the advertising business or the online advertising business is probably engaged in some sort of fraud, whether or not they know it. Let's start there. Can you explain one of those advertising fraud schemes that you were involved in?
Sure. So basically, this is the simplest form of advertising fraud: is creating a website, getting ad tags from an ad exchange like Google or AppNexus or any company that has a seat on those exchanges, and then purchasing web traffic that loads the page, generates ad slots, and those ad slots get sold into the exchanges in real time through what we call programmatic advertising. So a lot of that traffic that you end up buying is robotic, and you only purchase as much as you want, and that way you basically control your cost, revenue, and profit.
So just so listeners are clear, the process is you stand up a WordPress website, you throw up some content on the site, like let's say you make it beefrecipes.com or something, and then you just scrape the internet for things about beef recipes, and then you make a site that looks convincing, and then you insert little JavaScript blobs that you get from Google or AppNexus or these other advertising distributors. You put those on the website, which causes ads to appear whenever a consumer visits that website. And then whenever a consumer visits that website, they start to see ads. Maybe they're targeted about people who, advertisers that want to reach people who are interested in beef. And then you buy bot traffic to come to the website, quote, view those ads, and you make money on the arbitrage. You make money off of those ad impressions that are served to the bots.
Exactly. The one small thing is it's not that the advertisers are interested in advertising to people who have an inclination for cooking beef. It's that they want to show ads, especially retargeting ads. So retargeting is kind of the lifeblood of ad fraudsters because, basically when you're the actual website, you want to get as high ad revenue as possible. And the highest rates are paid by advertisers that are trying to complete a sale. So if I am shopping for, let's say, a Gucci purse online, and then I exit my shopping cart before completing the purchase, I'm going to be retargeted by their campaign, and they're going to pay a very high rate because they want to bring me back and complete the sale. So the advertisements most of the time have nothing to do with the content.
So you would have these bots, and these bots might go to, you would have the bot, like if you were programming a bot, it would be smart to make that bot go to Gucci.com, put a Gucci purse in the shopping cart.
Oh, of course.
And then go to the end of the shopping cart process and then drop off and then go visit beefrecipes.com so that you get really high ad impressions on that retargeting.
Right. And, it's Gucci purses are just one example. Look at kind of high urgency purchases. Let's say a flight ticket. I go to Emirates, I look at first class tickets to Tokyo, and then I leave before making a purchase. I'm going to start seeing Emirates ads for flights to Tokyo as soon as I leave.
The ecosystem is really complex, and I think we can boil it down by starting with the sucker in this process. The sucker in this process is essentially the company who is paying for the ad impression. So the advertiser, maybe it's Frito-Lay or Procter & Gamble or Emirates or Gucci or a Star Wars movie. Their motivation is to get a message viewed by a consumer. Do these advertisers understand how much of their advertisements are being viewed by bots?
No, I don't think so. Not on a mass scale. Not yet, at least. So, part of the thing, there's two parts to that question, I think. First is how much awareness is there on the advertiser side? And second is, does anybody know how much is actually being viewed by bots? And I think both of those are really important questions because the awareness side, I think, is going to be a gradual process, with education and kind of being willing to admit that things have not been done the smartest way for the past 10 years. And I think that's a tough proposition, but I think it's happening slowly. And I think a lot of the credit goes to advertising trade bodies, so associations that actually represent brand advertisers.
Because they know, oh my goodness, we are wasting so much money. I mean, we have to be digital because obviously because don't get me wrong, I've done these shows on advertising fraud. I don't think advertising is useless or bad. And I mean, you and I have had conversations around this. It's just that it is impossible to audit. That is what's so fascinating about this industry is that you have this herd mentality where we're just spouting numbers and those numbers aren't really based on anything convincing.
Right. So the thing with, this, it's that if you look at who wants to actually have these conversations is, the constituency of these trade bodies is these brands. And so it's actually the association's job to make them aware of these things, make sure they have enough information to do their jobs well. Otherwise, there's no reason to pay their membership dues. That's why the association exists in the first place. And like you said, with the reason they do advertising in the first place is because it works. They wouldn't have spent so much money every single year on advertising if they weren't getting some return. Now, where I want to point out the problem is the reason you should take fraud seriously is you're spending X amount of money on advertising based on a return of a certain amount. Now, if you know that 40% of X is going to waste, you could be spending 60%, continue to spend that 60% and get that same return that justifies that entire budget. And if you spent that entire budget more safely, in a smarter, more calculated way, a more cautious way, you could just be getting more return long-term on your advertising budget, which would give you the true value of the media that you're buying, and not just, accept that there's a certain amount being wasted and I'm just going to depend on all these different chains in the ecosystem to tell me, how effective my advertising is working.
What are those steps that you can take? So if you say, if you're Gucci and you say, I'm tired of spending so much money on, I got a higher volume of impressions in the report that gets delivered to me, but I know that some of that, like a large percentage of that is bot traffic. What are the steps that you take to clean up your impressions, and how can you measure that? Like, how do you know that you're getting more clean impressions?
So there's no on paper just way to say, okay, I'm going to implement this one process and now I'm going to get cleaner impressions, or that I'm going to know that my impressions are cleaner off the bat. Part of it has to just do with auditing your supply chain. So, if you're a brand advertiser, you go to your agency and you say, hey, what are you guys doing about fraud? And a lot of times the only answer that you'll get is, we have a verification solution where we're implementing a pixel across a campaign and we're measuring the quality of the traffic that way. That has become problematic as a sole solution because there's traffic available to websites that is designed, this robotic traffic is designed to pass the major filters used by the advertising industry. So that is not going to be a solution on its own. Second, part of this supply audit is for these digital media buys, your agency is going to be using a demand-side platform or a trade desk. So within that DSP or trade desk environment, who are all of their supply partners? So, there's now tons of ad networks on the other side. There's supply-side platforms. And then there are, just kind of what are these pools of inventory in these, what's called private marketplaces in the major ad exchanges. So you have all these different layers of supply coming into the funnel of a trade desk or a DSP, and then the campaigns from the advertiser side are being executed through that funnel. So it's important for the advertiser to audit the agency to audit the DSP, and then the DSP to continually audit all of their supply partners. Because fraud is not, a moral problem. It's not like, I think the industry gets too fixed on, the morality of it, and, the technical aspects of it, rather than looking at, okay, it's a purely financial motive. And also that it's a problem with the supply chain of advertising. That's how this traffic is coming through. It's not that the traffic is just appearing, on the advertiser side. These fraudsters, the people creating this traffic, the people buying this traffic, are purchasing it and using it to exploit the way that campaigns are executed on the advertiser side. So like we talked about retargeting, they know that they're going to get the most money from looking like, purchase intenders. So that's how they gear their bots to behave.
When I'm choosing the tools for my side projects, the first thing that I look for is ease of use. That's why I love MongoDB. It is the most popular non-relational database, and it is super easy to use. At the beginning of a project, I often don't know the shape of my objects, and Mongo makes it easy to evolve the database schema as I like over time. Over time, as my project gets popular, I'm going to need to scale, and thankfully, MongoDB has built-in horizontal scalability, but configuration and database maintenance aren't really what I want to spend my time on. Thankfully, MongoDB Atlas was released in 2016. MongoDB Atlas is the easiest way to get access to MongoDB without having to run the database yourself. You pay only for what you use, from small projects all the way up to large production deployments. To try MongoDB Atlas today, go to mongodb.com/sedaily and get a free $25 in credit. Use promo code GOATLAS25 to get that $25 in free credit. Atlas is the only hosted MongoDB service built by the engineers behind the database, the company MongoDB. With Atlas, you get end-to-end encryption, you get VPC peering, you get access to the latest releases, and for a limited time, you can go to mongodb.com/sedaily, enter promo code GOATLAS25, and get that $25 in credit and get started with MongoDB Atlas. Thanks to MongoDB for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and thanks for being the database behind a lot of my favorite side projects in the past. We're really happy to have MongoDB as a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. You mentioned this verification stuff. So I did a show with a verification company. I was a little skeptical of their techniques, basically because, I mean, you listened to the episode, we were talking about this earlier, and the technique is like, we've got this way of, we use biometrics, and we track, we build a model for what is a human and what is a bot. And I mean, and listeners can listen back to that episode and like hear it for themselves. But the thing is, it's like and what you told me on the phone a while ago was that these models for verification. So basically, the way a verification company works is, ad traffic goes to beefrecipes.com. Before ad impressions are served, you have a call out to this verification company that says, hey, is this person that just landed on beefrecipes.com a real person? So you would have a pixel that gets processed first, and it makes a call out to Are You Human and says, hey, can you check this if this person looks like a human? But what you told me on the phone was like, this is basically a subjective model that they've developed. And yeah, it's based on some things that look kind of objectively like what a human is, or a human is not. But in my conversation with Are You a Human, I was just unconvinced that these things cannot be easily spoofed by somebody who wants to spoof it. And one of the counter arguments was, yeah, maybe they could do that, but they're not doing it. And I was like, okay, so where's your proof of that? It's like, they're not doing it. They're going to do stuff like Uber fraud or payment system fraud or something that's higher return. And I was like, no, ad fraud is massive returns, and nobody's going after it. And it's been around, you've been able to exploit this for like a decade. Nobody's gone after it in the decade. It's like a really safe thing to invest in as a fraudster. Am I mistaken about anything that I just said?
No. They have every incentive to do so. And so there's two things I want to point out with these incentives on the fraud side is, first, in that basic cat and mouse scenario of, a bot detector versus a bot creator, the bot detector is operating as a legitimate business. They have employees that have, I guess for lack of a better term, work hours. They go home at the end of the day. And, I don't want to, be overly assuming, but generally they are paid a fixed salary. Just to give you like a very, hands-on scenario, that's the situation for a bot detector. Then if you look at the bot creator, they are what we call black hats. They have no set work hours, and they are directly compensated for how effective and how scalable their bots are. They're more incentivized financially and with their time to make sure that their bots are bypassing these filters. Now, you can get into a debate on who is more skilled. Maybe they have enough, white hats that kind of counterbalance the skill levels. But if you look at time and money incentives, they're much heavier on the bot creator side. So it's not that the incentives aren't there. Second is, with the incentives, what are the consequences? And so far, ad fraud does not break any laws, and the overwhelming majority of the time across the world, it's just starting to change slowly. it doesn't even violate contracts. Most contracts in advertising don't have clauses for invalid traffic. So there's not even civil consequences there.
That is what is so crazy to me, is because, you might say, if you're going to be a sketchy fraudster and you're going to take advantage of markets, why wouldn't you just go to Wall Street? And it's like, well, no, it's actually much easier. And you were telling me some of the returns that you were seeing as a black hat, and I was like, it was astounding how much money you can make as just the entrepreneur running beefrecipes.com.
And it's not very scrutinized.
It's not scrutinized, right?
Most of the industry is like, oh, okay, you run a website,
right?
Okay, that sounds legitimate. And to me, I'm so skeptical at this point that if somebody has a, like, let's take this. No offense to anybody that has a recipe network, but let's say somebody has a network of recipe sites and they're claiming to have 30 million visitors a month. I'm very skeptical until I can see the actual traffic reports and the sources and the growth and there should be fluctuations, and a lot of times when I do audits for clients, I see just like continual growth with lack of fluctuations.
No seasonality.
Actually you do seasonality, and seasonality is actually a sign that something is wrong, because if you look at how ad budgets are spent, they usually reset somewhere in January or February. So from February, let's say, all the way through December, they're just growing. Ad budgets are being spent at a higher rate and a higher rate and a higher rate. And then you get to October, November, December, which we refer to as Q4. That's when so much of that holiday spending is done by consumers, which means you're going to promote lots of products to them during that time. So that's when ad budgets are spent at the highest rate. If somebody's website starts at very low traffic in February and just continues to grow at higher volumes, all the way through December, and then resets the next year again at February, that is a big, big red flag, because that basically tells you that they're buying traffic to keep up with growing ad budgets, because, to them, it's a, profit game. So why would I buy traffic that I don't need?
It's pure arbitrage.
Right.
What is the role of Google and Facebook in this ecosystem?
Well, they are the biggest players in the ecosystem, at least for the time being. So, if you go with the assumption that I go with, which is that fraud is everywhere, they probably benefit the most from its existence, just financially. They obviously do care about quality. Google, has taken steps. I'm not going to say that they're doing everything they can. I'm definitely not convinced of that, because if Google and Facebook went out of their way to get rid of all the fraud, I'm sure there would be a lot more done. But maybe that just hasn't been much of a concern to them. Google obviously does just kick off some bad supply partners. If there's blatant fraud detected, they will just kick them off. And, basically they strong arm these fraudsters to basically just say, all right, we're just going to shut off your receivables. So even if have 3 months of receivables, let's say $500,000, they'll just shut it off. And nobody is going to be stupid enough to take Google to court over that. They'll bankrupt you just trying to, get a hearing.
So let me...
Then with Facebook, sure.
No, go ahead.
And then with Facebook, you see that, it's not that they've shown any hesitation to rid their network of fraud, because in 2014, they made an acquisition of a company called LiveRail, which was a video ad network. And, for me and other people that were on this Black Hat side, we knew LiveRail as the place to sell garbage video traffic. That's where you could sell garbage traffic for video ad CPMs, which were enormous, talking $10, $15, $20 per 1,000 impressions. And then they bought it, and we were like, oh my God, they're buying that? How much? 5 million, 10 million? And then we were blown away when it was $400 million. Said, okay, maybe they're going to turn around. Maybe they obviously don't know what's in there. Then in early 2016, they just shut it down. It became apparent to them internally that this is, rife with fraud, and they just shut it down. There was no hesitation, like some press release of, okay, we're going to try to turn it around. $400 million acquisition, they just shut it
So
down.
that's arguably a good sign, though, right? Like that's arguably a sign that they're like, oh my goodness, this is problematic. We need to implement some fixes.
But it shows you the lack of understanding in the first place that they even made the acquisition. So that's where I have this skepticism of how much they could be doing internally to even combat the problem when you're able to make a $400 million acquisition of a network that was known, across the industry with the, if you ask the right people, they would tell you this is not a good purchase. But, according to normal advertising metrics, it passed all the checks. Number of impressions, number of publishers, average CPM, fill rate from the advertiser, it passed all those basic checks. But if you're doing quality control with the assumption that ad fraud is it's out there, then you would have entirely different checks. And I don't think that was in place.
Sort of argument in Google and Facebook's favor is that you go on Gmail and you still get spam. I mean, less and less over time, but you still get some spam. And Gmail is a very simple, well-formed interface experience. It's just email. It's mostly text. The open internet is a much richer, more complex experience. You could say the same thing about a social network. And so I think an argument in Google and Facebook's favor is if you can't completely prevent spam in something as narrow as Gmail, where Google's incentives are much more in the direction of we want to prevent spam as much as possible in an email environment, it kind of is a strong counterargument against like Google and Facebook being nefarious, profit hoarding fraudsters themselves, right? Like, is that safe to say?
Yeah, sure. I think that's safe to say.
I think in our conversations about this, it sounds like you wish there was more, publicity from Google and Facebook about this. I mean, would that be? Do you think that's?
Given that they're
more transparency.
Yeah. I don't think Google should shy away from sharing what they're doing about fraud. But the thing is, Google also is on so many websites. Google's advertising tags are on so many websites. And for smaller advertisers, let's say, a dry cleaning storefront, or let's say a, specialty butcher shop, those small advertisers, they're not going to come to a digital ad agency and then, come up with a programmatic retargeting campaign and this. The majority of them go to Google because it's the most accessible. And it's also the most, it's the most trusted name that they know of. It's like, hey, I already have a Gmail account and, I just log in with my Gmail ID. I create a, AdWords campaign, or, if I'm a bigger advertiser, I use AdX and, just put in my ads and, pick what type of websites, and it's very seamless. But if they, if those small advertisers are not made aware of, okay, hey, this is how you do quality checks, and this is how you make sure that, you're reaching the right people. Let me take that back. They do help them reach the right people, but smaller advertisers are not made aware of the levels of fraud. And if you take the assumption, let's say a conservative estimate of 25% of traffic is fraudulent in some way, the majority of advertisers are, this, conglomerate of small local, businesses. So I'm a lawyer, or I'm an accountant, or I am a, insurance broker, or I am a butcher shop, or I'm a dry cleaner. There's so many of these campaigns in there all over the world. Because Google, if you go into Google's, campaign portal, you can like draw a line on Google Maps around city blocks for who you want to target. It's very localized. This is not, Gucci is not going in and saying, okay, well, I want to, advertise to this city block of San Francisco. That's geared towards local advertisers.
So wait,
there's
there's
fraud everywhere. There's local advertisers bearing the brunt of it.
So the smaller players, you're saying, make up more of the net ad purchasing traffic than giant brands like Gucci and Procter & Gamble?
So.
Really?
I would love for somebody to correct me on that.
Okay.
But as far as I know, that is the case.
Fascinating. And you hear you hear a defense of fraud is priced into the system, but that's probably not true, because if what you said is correct, I guess we don't know that for sure. But whether or not it's correct, even Frito-Lay and Procter & Gamble aren't pricing in fraud. They don't know fraud exists. There's information asymmetry.
Right. But again, they do have people that, let's say in the next 2 years, whose job it is to inform them of that. Their agencies or their marketing teams, that will come back to them. That same information is not going to be as accessible to a smaller advertiser.
There are these ad exchanges that we haven't really talked a lot about. We haven't talked about the middle layers. OpenX, AppNexus, these are huge businesses that most people haven't ever heard of. What purpose do they serve?
They serve a purpose to connect ad suppliers, which are websites with ad spaces, with advertisers who want to target the users visiting those sites. And basically, they process transactions. They basically execute what we call RTB, real-time bidding, which is a 100 to 150 millisecond second price auction, meaning that the highest bidder wins, and they pay the price that the second highest bidder was willing to pay.
And another set of players is these DSPs, SSPs. These are demand-side providers, supply-side providers. These sit between the publisher and the advertiser. Can you explain these layers? Also explain how these interact with the exchanges too.
So the DSP sits on the buy side of the exchange, so the demand-side platform, because they execute the advertising demand. And then the supply-side platforms sit on the sell side of the exchange, which is the websites. So, you're basically just looking at multiple layers, because the exchange is processing, it's holding the auctions and it's processing the transaction. And then it's actually taking the creative, file, whether it's an image or a video, and placing it onto the ad slot coming from the supply side. The thing is, the publishers are aggregated into the supply side platforms. So, one supply side platform represents, let's say, just for example, 1,000 different websites. And then there's 10 supply side platforms that plug into the exchange. So now you have, 10,000 sites coming into the exchange. And then the DSPs are executing campaigns for, let's say, 10 advertisers each. Lots of different campaigns, but let's say 10 advertisers. And then you have 10 DSPs. So now you have 100 advertisers who have 10,000 different sites available to them. And that's the purpose of the exchange.
So the DSPs aggregate demand, SSPs aggregate supply. It sounds like this is a good economic system. Or that makes economic sense to me. Would you say that's accurate? Like, is this, because it seems like that's pretty efficient.
I think it is efficient. The problem is there's still a few changes that need to be made in the incentive structures to incentivize quality on all sides. So what I mean by that is most of these, what I refer to as ad tech layers. So, they're not doing the creative work. They're not doing this strategy necessarily. They're focused on executing the media buy or executing the selling of this ad space. They charge either they charge a rev share or a buy side fee, and then they make money on ad serving. So per impression transacted, they make a small fee. So the problem with that is that whether these ad spaces are $10 CPMs, $10 for 1,000 ad slots, or whether it's 10 cents per 1,000, which is very low quality, they're making the same money. So they're not incentivized necessarily towards quality right now. And if you have many, many more of the 10 cent CPM impressions to fill those ad budgets, you're going to see a lot more volume, which means you're going to make more ad serving fees. And I think that's where some changes need to be made across the industry.
Right, and I want to talk more about that, because so you left your job as sketchy artist, whatever you want to call it, black hat ad tech person. Look, and don't get me wrong, like I think, when I was talking to you about it, you were fascinated by the industry. I mean, it's the same reason I went into, my first job out of school. I went into like a options trading place, and I was like, there is a chance that there is sketchiness that I'm gonna see, like at the company that I worked at. I didn't, by the way, I didn't see anything sketchy there, but I was just so fascinated. There's something so interesting about markets and highly automated markets, and when you get into the advertising game, you realize how much of it is just like Wall Street. So you've started this company called the DAR Method, and what you've explained to me is you're kind of a consultant. You basically go to these advertising conferences and make advertisers feel really sad. What are you trying to do with the DAR Method?
My goal is to educate all pieces of the advertising ecosystem on the logistics of fraud. The problem right now is, you don't have opportunities for people that are spending money on advertising to learn very clearly what the dangers are in terms of fraud. And basically, like my tagline is, advertising should be, effective, accountable, and understood. So, sure, you can come up with the greatest targeting strategy and, execution plan and, media buying plan. But if you're just, seeing 40% of that money go to waste, you don't necessarily even know how effective your advertising is. You could have come up with the greatest campaign that, if you were only buying human traffic, would have, won some advertising award. But because your supply chain is not clean, you're never going to understand how effective your campaign was actually going to be. So giving advertisers an opportunity to understand that, knowing that I can provide firsthand knowledge of how it's done, and also, don't believe everything you read. There's a lot of companies, and this is an investigation we're working on right now, so I can't name the company yet, but I would love to give it to you and your listeners at a later point. That there's this company that sells blatant fraudulent traffic that is designed to pass major filters for sub-penny click prices. I'm talking about 0.6 of a cent per click, 0.3 of a cent per click, depending on the filter. That now is providing advertising, click advertising, to the US government. So, it's this whole lack of awareness. And sure, we can, and I've written about this, is that people can justify, in our deep subconscious, we're just even if you work in an agency, you're like, well, these big brands like Kraft or, Pepsi, they have so much money, what's a little waste?
Right. And the people spending the money are some digital marketing person,
right?
Lower down the chain.
Actual money.
Yeah, it's not their money.
But if you talk about those local advertisers, if you don't actually fix the actual supply chain and the way advertising is executed, you have these small businesses that are going to continue to get screwed by just inherent problems in the system, and they're not even going to know. And it's I think that's where the problem lies, more than just trying to fix things for big brands. Because if you fix the system, it's going to be better for the small businesses.
It sounds like the advertisers that you talk to are somewhat receptive. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I make this joke that, when I give a speech or a presentation, I know I did a good job if everybody looks frustrated and depressed at the end, because I'm not delivering good news. But part of my point is that now you understand what to look for. And so your perspective on approaching the problem is going to be entirely different. You're going to ask smarter questions, better questions. You're going to demand better answers to those questions. Because if you didn't really understand how fraud works, who is doing it, I provide, very hands-on examples. I show my own report that I've done where I created a fake site earlier this year, got it approved on an ad platform, sold ads into it, and I showed that I was buying all of this, 0.1 of a cent per click data center traffic. Then you understand, okay, well, I can ask better questions, because an agency, let's say on behalf of their clients, was asking, their technology partners, okay, what are you doing about fraud? If you didn't know enough about fraud, you could be given any answer and you would have to accept it.
And let's be clear.
I think that's what needs to change.
Let's be clear. Your example, the hilarious part of it is you're buying data center traffic, which should be really, really easy to identify. It's like coming from a virtualized server on Amazon somewhere. Human traffic doesn't look like that.
There's one question of, whether it's detectable or not, how sophisticated the creators of the traffic are.
Right.
That the degree of which that played into it is debatable. The second issue there is, I've heard lots of justifications for allowing data center traffic. I can't speak on this, authoritatively, but what I get told as a justification is there's lots of corporate setups where they use data center proxies for all of their employees. And so advertisers shouldn't be shut off from showing ads to people who are at work from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 every day, just because they're accessing the internet through data center connection.
Life is too short to have a job that you don't enjoy. If you don't like your job, go to hired.com/SEDaily. Hired makes finding a new job enjoyable, and Hired will connect you with a talent advocate that will walk you through the process of finding a better job. It's like a personal concierge for finding a job. Maybe you want more flexible hours or more money or remote work. Maybe you want to work at Facebook or Uber or Stripe or some of the other top companies that are desperately looking for engineers on Hired. You deserve a job that you enjoy because you're someone who spends their spare time listening to a software engineering podcast. Clearly, you're passionate about software, so it's definitely possible to find a job that you enjoy. Check out hired.com/SEDaily to get a special offer for Software Engineering Daily listeners. A $1,000 signing bonus from Hired when you find that great job that gives you respect and salary that you deserve as a great engineer. I love Hired because it puts more power in the hands of engineers. Go to hired.com/SEDaily to get advantage of that special offer. And thanks to Hired for being a continued longtime sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. What do the ad tech companies say? Like when you because you said you're trying to change the whole industry. What are the what's the response from the ad tech companies?
I hope that's not how it came across, but that's the grander goal. Ad tech companies, it really depends, and it really depends on the people at the top of these companies and how proactive they want to be. There's plenty of companies that have taken public stances against fraud, and they have taken steps just to kind of boot off bad players. The problem with that is, it's cat and mouse. It's not like they're banned for life. They lose their account, they'll find another account, they'll go under somebody else's account. They'll find a way around. Ad tech companies, I recently, was very surprised. I'd never expected a supply side platform to reach out to me, but I did work with a supply side platform, and it was amazing. How receptive they were, how much initiative they had taken internally to kind of promote quality as a differentiator between them and their competitors, even though they know that in the short term, it's not going to be beneficial. Their lifeblood is to have as much advertising inventory available as possible for buyers, but they're willing to compromise on the short-term revenue for the long-term goal of being known for their quality, which is only going to bring in more buyers, and those buyers are going to pay higher premium rates to be able to buy in that network. So I think it's shifting slowly because, again, I think it just depends on who's running the company and, whether they're exposed to the right information. Are they made aware of, what this problem is and how it's kind of, affecting the entire market? I think it's shifting slowly.
Do you get responses from people who are in denial or disbelief, and they're like, "You're a conspiracy theorist. You have no data to back any of this"?
I've been called just blatantly. I've been called an idiot. I've been called a fearmonger. I've been called a liar. Because like I talk a lot about these financial incentives, and I've been called out, and it's very fair for them to say, well, you're trying to make the problem seem bigger than it is because you want clients to hire you. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure, but I also just put my research and all my, reports out there. It's not that I'm like, here, buy a $5.99 subscription to access my pamphlet. It's just out there. Like the education is free. Now, if you want, I'm not trying to make a plug for my consultancy, but now if you want like hands-on audits and, process improvement, those types of things, then that's where my business lies. But in the education, like if I'm hiding information from people, then what's the point of doing, anything that I'm doing?
Well, it's like why, and the onus is not, I don't see the onus being on you any more than it is on the ad tech companies. I mean, you hear these absurd numbers like, 70% of advertising is seen by bots, or 80% is seen by bots, or 50% is seen by bots. Those numbers don't come from anywhere reliable. And yet,
so it's sampling. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sampling, but like that's not...
It's a problem with, I think that's just basic human consumption of information. You see this a lot with these like fake news articles that are going around now. People are, oh, how did this fake news get so big? It's because we are kind of wired to believe what we're told. We like have some type of inherent trust that, okay, well, if somebody's saying it, like why would they lie? And with this, it's not that they're even trying to lie. It's that they took one sample of traffic, let's say even statistically big enough to be quantitatively representative of the entire market. Then they used one detection method, a single detection method. There's lots of detection methods on how to define a bot or a human. They used one detection method to say, this is the rate of bot traffic in this sample. And then they extrapolated that to the entire market.
Right, and that is like Mark Zuckerberg saying, it's crazy to believe that the fake news on Facebook impacted the election. It's like, well, okay, if it's so crazy, then why don't you show us your audit methods?
And there aren't any, because it was never a problem until now. It was never considered a problem until now.
Well, I mean, there could be audit methods. I mean, Facebook has not an all-seeing eye, but I'm sure they have some internal scrutiny. I'm sure they have done some stuff where there's their introspection into how much fake news they think.
I don't think it's a systematic process, though. I don't think it's I think there's from the reports that have come out and what I know at Facebook is that there were teams that were doing these things, but it wasn't part of the corporate structure and behavior. It's just like constantly remove these things.
Right, but and the fact that he was willing to say it's crazy to believe that this had a significant impact, I think is indicative of how far. Because it's like, I mean, the thing is, fake news to me seems easier to police than advertising fraud. There's a lot more little players that seem semi-trustworthy in the advertising business than there are in the news business. Like the news, there's a smaller subset of like reliable news outlets, and yet Zuckerberg's statement on fake news was so tone deaf to reality. I mean, you got to give the guy a little bit of slack. He's the CEO, and naturally CEOs are a little bit disconnected from what's happening on the ground. He's part of his day gets taken up by what's going on with WhatsApp in the Indian market. How are we going to grow that? How are we collecting enough data? Are we organizing the data properly? Like we have to just like give him that little bit of credit. Oh yeah,
that because he and I give a lot of credit to the entire team at Facebook for just shutting down a $400 million video ad network that they found to be fraudulent.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, like I do give him the credit, but I agree with you that statement, I don't think there's a single person that didn't roll their eyes when they heard him say that.
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of Facebook, a fan of Zuckerberg. Like I think in the long run, you could see the advantages of Facebook being somewhat of a walled garden with a single account policy for individuals in terms of getting highly reliable advertising. And I do think that the other shoe is going to drop eventually on this fraud stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Like it seems like right now we're kind of in I'd like to draw the parallel between the 2008 mortgage crisis, where you had this institutional herd mentality for like 6 years or 7 years or something, where it's we had these supposedly uncorrelated mortgage-backed securities, and they all turned out to be worthless because they were actually correlated. And today, media buyers, they're purchasing all this traffic, and they're willing to say, 50% of our advertising spend is wasted. We just don't know what 50%. They love saying that.
Yeah, I have heard that.
But the truth is that maybe they're wasting closer to 80, 90, 99% of their ad budget, and
maybe some smarter advertiser is only wasting 10 and you're the person that's wasting 80. If you just take that average, there's 50% or 40% being wasted total. If I say I'm only wasting 10, there's somebody else wasting 70%.
Why doesn't does the press report on this? I remember we talked a little bit at lunch a while ago about press potentially getting involved in this. Why doesn't the press report on this very much?
I think it's a very misunderstood problem. And this is the problem. And I sympathize with specifically the advertising trade press, because it's not that people just lay a ton of information down at their feet and are like, here, please, we'd like to be open and upfront with you. Here, can you honestly report on problems with the industry? That does not happen. They kind of have to scrounge for tidbits of reliable information from professionals in the industry, and then put together these reports and articles for the rest of the industry that kind of take, as gospel, which is scary sometimes, because I have people that will, argue with me that that's not how fraud is done. I read this article that said this, and I'm like, well, okay, but you read an article, and again, no offense to anybody in the trade press, I have a lot of respect for them, but they are journalists. They are not ad fraud specialists. So they are giving you the best representation of what they understand. And you have to take it as that. You can't take it as, this is a, expert report written by a specialist. This is a journalist giving you the best representation of the information on a very, misunderstood and evasive topic. And that's how I think people should look at what they read.
Do you think there is any suppression? Are Google and Facebook suppressing? Are there actually people writing about this and it just gets suppressed?
Yes. Yes. There are reports that have been suppressed, academic reports that have been suppressed. And, I can't publicly go into detail and disclose, exactly what happened, but that has happened, and it's scary that way. And I don't think it's the heads of the companies that made those decisions. It's some mid to senior level, director that heard that was out, squashed it because they felt that was their duty. And that is very scary to me, the suppression of information, because it's not in people's financial interest. And that's, you related it to the 2008 crash. We have a lot of ad tech companies going public. And if you look at the trends so far, with these ad tech companies, it has not been promising, but you see more and more that are, going public, and you can't necessarily even blame the, CEO or the directors, because there's VCs that pumped tens of millions of dollars into those companies, and they want their return. They are not going to be like, oh, well, I guess I'll just wait for my payout because I want the industry to have, higher quality standards before we, open up these shares to the public. That's just not how they think. They're a financial institution. They're trying to get their money back.
The narrative around this bot traffic that ultimately is viewing these ads is that the bot traffic is coming from China or Russia, or it's organized crime. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from miscreant teenagers? Is it coming from a programmer in a college dorm? Who is the source?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yes. That's the most comprehensive answer. We have this, I don't really get it, but and there's obviously things with Putin and suppression of, freedom of press and speech in Russia. But we have this some weird inherent thing that we just started blaming Russia off the cuff as being the source for this problem. And I just don't get it. I mean, it's like the most easily acceptable answer for some reason, and people just
because Russians are good programmers.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. Right, it's like all the hackers live in Russia, and fraud is only done by hackers, and that's just not the case. And part of what I try to explain to people is if you actually dig into these fraudulent ad networks, there's a stay-at-home dad with 3 kids who's a fantastic husband and a fantastic father and just a great guy, and he loves to rock climb and like go to the gym, and he runs a fraudulent ad network. He sources bots by distributing malware, and he runs a fraudulent ad network. And he's not sitting in a basement. He's got a nice home office, just to paint you the picture, like this person actually exists.
Yeah, and that sounds like a pretty good life
with a hoodie.
Right.
Yeah, it is a good life, and there's no consequences. He's not going to go to jail for this.
Yep.
Not going to get sued for this. The people that he works with, his buyers, are legitimate companies that continue to buy from him because he creates high quality, high revenue generating traffic.
And because he's
this is not a hacker problem.
That's like what's an interesting byproduct of the SSP, DSP layers of abstraction between the publishers and the advertisers. Is you get removed, accountability gets subtracted. Okay, so let's close off. Plenty of interesting stuff we've talked about. Plenty more we could have covered. What are the biggest changes that you're seeing in this industry, in the advertising industry? Like what's coming up on the horizon?
I think agencies are going to get a heavy metaphorical kick in the teeth because there's a lot of these like transparency reports coming out, and there's been a lot of seeds of doubt planted into the
agencies. So for people who don't know, I'm Gucci. I go to an agency and I say, hey, buy me $100,000 worth of the cyber advertising,
right.
And the agency does something,
right?
And that something is a waste of money many times.
So basically, agencies are hired as specialists to do the planning and execution of advertising. So, they are basically compensated for knowing the market and also having creative people, like a team of creatives on staff that make a can of Pepsi look extremely refreshing in a 300 by 250 pixel video ad on my phone. That's what they're paid for. The problem, and what advertisers are waking up to, is that agencies are not incentivized financially to act in their best interests. They're paid on a margin basis. So, agencies are if I say to an agency, I want to spend $1 million on advertising, I'm also going to pay a 10% fee on that, a margin fee, to the agency for the actual execution. So I pay them $100,000 to execute that media buy. The problem right now is, given this fraud situation, agencies have never had an incentive financially to spend less on behalf of their advertiser clients, because if they spend less, that percentage drops. Like, that 10% went from 100,000 to 80,000. Now they made 20,000 less, and what, they're going to move to a smaller office? They're going to fire employees? Like that's why you see so many hiring and firing sprees at ad agencies, because it's so volatile that way. The problem is that advertisers need to realize that you need to compensate people fairly to do their jobs. And this goes all the way down. And this is what I think is going to change in the next year or two, is you're going to see contract and compensation structures change to get incentives in line with quality. Because what happens when the agency makes less money, they negotiate lower rates with the actual media suppliers. And when media suppliers are paid lower rates, they have to make up the money somewhere. They have an incentive to buy traffic. And so volume gets bigger, rates get lower, and everybody has to, basically make their bottom line. They have shareholders, they have investors, they have employees, and everybody's being squeezed from the top down. And I think that's going to change over the next couple of years.
All right. So winter is coming. Shailin,
yes, it is.
Shailin, it's been really great talking to you. I think this is one of the best episodes I've done.
Well.
I really like what you're doing, and feel free to come back on the show if you got some.
I'd be happy to. I should have some interesting updates for you guys in the next couple of months.
Awesome. Software Engineering Daily is having our first ever meetup in San Francisco, January 11th at Galvanize. If you live in the Bay Area and you listen to Software Engineering Daily, please come check it out. I would love to meet you. We're going to have some awesome speakers. We have Pete Hunt, who is one of the early members of the React.js team, who is now the CEO of Smite. Hasib Qureshi, who has been one of the most popular guests on Software Engineering Daily. Preeti Kasireddy, who has written about her career transition from venture capital to software engineering via Coding Bootcamp. Each one of these speakers is going to give an awesome talk, and I hope you can make it January 11th at Galvanize in San Francisco. You can sign up on meetup.com. You can also find the link on the Software Engineering Daily website, softwareengineeringdaily.com. I really hope to see you there.